Okay, hello and welcome to the Patent Literacy Symposium session, Making Connections, Communication and Literacy with AAC. My name is Kirsten DeRoche and I'm joined by my colleague Maggie Sierpiowski. We're excited to facilitate this session for everyone. Before we start, we have a few housekeeping items to review. You can access presenter handouts for this session, the presenter bio, and the conference schedule on the PaTTAN website, and Maggie is putting those links into the chat for us. The slides can be accessed on the link that Tammy and Maggie just entered, that direct link for slides to this session. Just as a reminder, the session will be recorded and is 75 minutes in length, which includes a 15-minute Q&A period. To access closed captioning, please click on the icon CC Live Transcript that's located on your Zoom control panel. If you experience any technical difficulties, please go to the Technical Support Guides area above the schedule on the symposium page. We ask that you keep your video feature off and stay muted to eliminate any potential distractions during the presentation portion of our session. We'd love for you, if you're on Twitter or social media, to tweet about or post about our literacy symposium. The hashtag Maggie just entered into the chat is PaTTANLit2022. And now I'd like to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Dr. Tammy Thompson-Cooke. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all virtually. For those of you who read my bio, you know that I am a speech-language pathologist and an assistive technology specialist. I work at PaTTAN as an educational consultant, supporting the AT and speech and language initiatives. I also support the autism initiative as well. But this in particular is one of my passions. I love working with literacy and with students who use augmentative and alternative communication as their method of communication. Learning to read is so challenging, particularly for students who use AAC, that this is the way that I have had structured activities during my speech and language or therapy sessions or worked with my teachers. So I've worked very closely with my teachers, with my reading specialists, with my EL professionals, and the rest of the classroom staff and related services professionals. It really does take a team effort in order to teach communication and focus on language. So far, I've attended several of the sessions, and everything that I've heard so far are things that I've supported. So the way that I look at augmentative and alternative communication, it's the stuff that goes with the language for students who need the stuff. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. As you know, we focus on training and technical assistance to build capacity. Family engagement is also part of this, and so I will encourage you to also be reaching out to your families, working with them, because we only see our students for a portion of the day, and working collaboratively with the families as educational partners allows students to build their literacy skills as well as their communication and language. Oh, sorry. I think it actually skips a little bit ahead when I do that. Here are the objectives. You have access to those in your slides. I am going to, I don't know how many, I see some of you are speech language pathologists. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick review to make sure we're all on the same page as far as what I'm thinking about when I talk about augmentative communication. So augmentative communication, of course, we're augmenting what we're already communicating, whether it's through facial expressions, gestures, writing, drawing, pointing. It's the additional meaning behind what we're trying to express. And then alternative is for looking at a way other than verbal speech. So of course, that's the basic definition of augmentative and alternative communication. Communication is the essence of human life, and all people have the right to communicate to the fullest extent possible. So using literacy as a tool for building language helps our students express what they want, with whom they want, and whenever they want. Oops, sorry, here we go again. It's jumping slides. Dowden and Blackstone had 3 types of communicators that they highlighted. One was emerging communicators, who are essentially pre or early symbolic level and non-literate. These are the students that require a lot of communication partner and structured activities in order to be able to communicate effectively. They're learning to communicate, they're learning to read. Providing these symbolic supports are extremely helpful because we're basically mentoring and guiding them along that path. Then we have the context-dependent students who are they're pre-literate or maybe have a few words that they recognize, but they're still learning how to read and maybe spell and exploring, potentially their devices or their AAC systems. And they rely on that structured event in order to provide the cues that they need to be producing language or expressing themselves. And then we have the independent students who are typically literate. They have developed these skills and are interacting with print on their communication devices or on their AAC systems in a way that allows them to be much more independent and interact with both familiar and unfamiliar communication partners. Again, here we're just keeping on the communication same page. There are different competencies that I look at. One is linguistic and ties directly right into literacy. The social competence, we're learning so much from reading stories about how others interact with each other. I love literacy so much because it provides lots of stories for us to learn and explore and figure out what we like and what, through the characters in our stories. Operational competence usually refers to some of the things that a lot of my colleagues struggle with if they're not familiar with a communication device. This is more of that, how do I get from one area to the next in my communication system, in my environment? How am I using the tools available to me with more proficiency? And then the strategic competence is, if there's a breakdown, how do I fix it? So Lloyd et al. Stated that typically developing children are considered competent communicators if their communication is appropriate for their age and developmental level. Although AAC users may not use expressive language fully, they may still be considered competent if they use their AAC to communicate functionally and adequately. So there is a continuum just along the technologies, so to speak. Remember earlier I talked to you, I referred to, AAC sometimes is the stuff. So if there's no tech, we're looking at more of these services, strategies, procedures, things within the environment that we could be manipulating. This might also be the facial expressions that I was talking about. How are we looking at the non-stuff? And then we have low tech, which is any sort of electronic or non-electronic device that doesn't use a computer chip. It's basically that you can be creating picture symbols or communication boards or displays or even picture schedules using technology, but this stuff doesn't require electronics to be used, essentially. And then high tech is the stuff that does have some sort of computer chip that you can therefore program and change and allows a lot more flexibility. So breaking it back down into the stuff and non-stuff. So in AAC, we talk about aided and unaided. Unaided is, again, those facial expressions, body positioning. Sometimes some of our students will use that body positioning as they get close to you to let you know that they're interested in what you're doing. Or they might be using some form of sign language, such as signed English or American Sign Language. They might be using approximations. These are things that are the non-stuff way that we communicate with one another. And then the aided is when we're using real objects or miniature objects, pictographs, line drawings, communication devices. These are all the things that supplement what we're doing to communicate and express ourselves. AAC users must learn both their meanings alone and in combination for receptive language, and how to produce them in communicative contexts or expressive language. So just quickly, some of the things that are really hard for some of my colleagues who are new to augmentative communication system is that there's direct selection where you're directly touching it. This is our touch screen when we're talking. I mean, communication devices and assistive technology have come a long way because now it's built into our iPad, our phone. It's so exciting. We also have ways that we can use eye gaze using eye tracking technology to be able to directly access and select items on your computer, kind of like a mouse. Basically, it's tracking your eyes and then uses electronics to select the item that you're dwelling on as your selection. So there's different ways that you can be selecting. We also have a colleague that we work with at PaTTAN, and he uses actually a head stick, and that's the way he directly touches his communication device. Then there's also indirect or scanning, and this is where we're looking at the ways that we're using switches. And the way that I easily explain it to somebody who doesn't actually use switches is it's if you were to tab through the fields and then hit return in order to access, you know, the hotspots on your screen when you're on a website or, you know, in a document. So that's basically the idea behind scanning if you're not familiar. Excuse me. So strategies often used with our AAC users just to help them have more of a seamless way of functionally communicate is that, yes, AAC is a human right for sure. You know, we can be looking at choice making, but not using it exhaustively. These are strategies that hopefully you're using flexibly, but not in a testing sort of way. You want to be communicating with someone. Choice making can feel like, excuse me, I'm recovering from COVID, so I'm going to take a quick drink. So choice making, you might do this in a way where you're holding up items. If their access method is maybe looking at something, they can look at the choice that you're holding up. If they're more of an auditory scanner, we'll talk about that later, then you might, like if you were a host at someone's house, if you were given choices and they said, what would you like to drink? You would ask for your choices. This is just another way of allowing to provide choices. Excuse me, sorry. And so you would give those choices and, you know, whether it's milk, juice, water, tea. And then in the case of our AAC users that are nonverbal, they might either use one word or they might use yes or no to indicate their choice. Yes, no questions are great, but imagine 20 questions for every single thing that you want to communicate. It's fine when you're confirming, but again, we're looking at communication and building language. Aided language stimulation is kind of like what I was talking about earlier, where you're doing descriptive teaching as you're pointing to items to provide that modeling. And that way it helps the students find the information that they're using, but it also allows them to look at the tools and resources that they're expected to be learning. Because if we're modeling verbal speech and they can't use it, it's not providing them the modeling that is true to the skills that they're learning. And then of course, we have prompt hierarchies. We use them as educators, but if you happen to have access to behavior analysts, they're fabulous at helping with forward chaining, backward chaining, and the various types of prompts within the hierarchy. And then using sign language would be another tool. Some things to consider with language considerations are how long has the individual been using language. If you think about second language learners with average cognition, they typically have to be immersed in a language for about 3 years before they become fluent. High impact Another thing to consider is high impact messages are good for participation or quickly communicating, like in greetings. But you may want to think about ways that you're using vocabulary and building their language competence. And again, going back to literacy, it's providing that language modeling that helps them to learn how to put words together, because we're looking at semantics and syntax. When we're looking at core, it's really common vocabulary. There's a set of high frequency or common vocabulary words that we use 80% of our day. And then fringe is really just that situational words that come up once in a while, like chlorophyll. How many times today have you used chlorophyll? When we're using core, we can actually use different things, just different strategies such as describing it. So if you have a student who maybe needs to describe that situational language, then instead of having them add chlorophyll to their device, unless they're going to go into botany, have them describe it with it's green, it's needed, maybe it's used with the sun, it comes from plants, it's food for plants, or it makes food for plants. These are all high frequency, or I'm sorry, common vocabulary words that could be used to describe that situational vocabulary. So I love this quote. I use it over and over again. A long time ago, there was this person, Kati, who wrote a blog that referred to how far will 100 words get you? When you think about teaching vocabulary to students with limited vocabulary, such as those who use augmentative and alternative communication, if this person had done a comparison, if you only taught them nine words of the common vocabulary, they could read 21% of Macbeth. It's a high school level curriculum literacy activity. And then if you taught them 500 of the most common words, they could read 80%. I used to tease some of my speech language pathologists when I would do trainings and say, I'm just going to be really lazy and only teach them 500 words. Please don't do that. Because then I know that they're set up for reading at least 80% of Macbeth. So 500 words in the world of augmentative and alternative communication, they've looked at these 500 words comprise about 80% of what we say every day. So it's a nice way of streamlining and making vocabulary selection a little bit more efficient, but also thinking about going back to our situational words. What are the ones that are high impact that they're going to use all the time? Because if a student has augmentative and alternative communication, they have limited real estate either on their device or within their system. You know, yes, they could probably get to it, but depending on if they're touching the device, if they're using eye gaze, or if they're a switch scanner, they only have so many buttons on their system. And it really makes it hard for them to navigate 5 pages in to get to a word that maybe they could just be describing. So these are other things that you want to think about. There are 3 elements, basic, you know, again, we're going down to basics of 3 elements of AAC are a means for representing, like symbols or alphabet, the method of selection, such as scanning or direct selection, and then a way to transmit that. And some of our students who are using augmentative communication may be using it as a tool for helping them sequence their language, and then they say it verbally. It may be that they have to get somebody's attention. They might be signers, or they might be using a device that actually uses text-to-speech in order to generate that message. So that's basically a speech generating device. For representing language, there are 3 methods of representation, and many of the AAC systems use one or a combination of these methods, including the alphabet-based methods. If you have a robust augmentative communication device that's high tech, then you have an alphabet board. If you don't, you should actually really consider making sure that your students have access to alphabets, because this is how they start learning phonemic awareness and literacy and starting to make the connections between the spoken language that they hear and the printed word that they're seeing in front of them. Then there are single meaning pictures that most systems have, and those are great because it provides a quick reference, particularly for students who are still learning to recognize print. But most of the systems have print and icons if they're a robust system. And then there's some semantic compaction that uses multiple meaning icons in sequences to represent language. A system that uses that is like Unity, or the LAMP app, which is language and motor planning. These both use sequences in a way that you're connecting to symbols. They still have words or some words, and then it creates a way to navigate to new words. It actually reduces the amount of navigation between pages when you do this. All right, so for literacy, we're going to drive, now that we've gotten into here's how I think as an AAC specialist. I felt like this was an important quote because, again, we're looking at our students' ability to communicate whatever they want, with whomever they want, whenever they want. And in order to do this, we need to be teaching them reading and writing. Something that we should be thinking about with what we know about our AAC users is that reading, writing, and listening and speaking are interconnected yet independent. These are all skills that we teach independently, but as we were hearing earlier, verbal language and literacy are closely aligned. They develop in overlapping parallel ways. They're infused throughout the day, especially at school. Children with CCN is complex communication needs who use augmentative and alternative communication have challenges accessing the curriculum because of their different motor patterns, because of their limited ability to communicate using verbal speech or a way that is expected by their communication partners. And then there's minimal control over acquisition of new vocabulary. In the many years ago, I don't know how many of you happen to be in this realm. Caroline Musselwhite used to talk about, and also Linda Burkhart used to talk about words from heaven. These are the words that come to us during activities on our activity boards, and they're great, like chlorophyll. But then you never see them again. And so next month, you've used chlorophyll all month long, but next month, now that you've had it, you no longer have it. So this is where literacy and teaching phonemic awareness and spelling are really critical for some of our students, because if we can teach them literacy so that they can start either spelling on their own or recognizing the words using word prediction, then it opens up a whole new world for them. And then, of course, language is the medium for reading, writing, and communicating. So, you know, my personal bias is speech pathologist. Then I found this chart really helpful as a speech language pathologist, just from the aspect of looking at Charles' stages of reading. There are various, I'm going to copy the link and add it to the chat window right now. So there is the article. And then here's the other, sorry. There we go. So what I really like about this is it helps us to kind of predict where some of our students might be, because even though they use some other method than, you know, either to augment or as an alternative to verbal speech, they're still going through these stages as a pre-reader, or they're maybe recognizing words. It's just they're doing it differently than some of our verbal students. They're learning initial reading and decoding. Then they're doing confirmation and fluency. Our fluency with an augmentative communication user is going to look totally different because of the difference in their ability to use expressive language. If they're not using verbal speech, then it'll look differently. And then eventually we learn to read for new meaning. It's really exciting. I had a student, I don't recommend this, but it was a side benefit. There was a mom who had shared that she was asked by her at-home behavior analyst to be working on flashcards. And the only one she could find had the words down below, because, you know, when you get them from like Dollar Bin or whatever, they have the word, there's a picture. And he developed what's considered hyperlexia, because he matched the actual word to the item. What he later developed when he was taught literacy was how to read and tie that meaning together. So he launched right into learning how to read and get new meaning from the printed word that was in front of him, because of the flashcards that his mom had used with him when he was in preschool. And then, of course, they did develop like phonemic awareness, because that allowed him to be independent as a reader. Then there's, you know, developing multiple viewpoints. This is what I was talking about earlier, where if we're looking at that narrative aspect and we're learning from the stories and adventures that we read about, we get to see that other people have similar characteristics, but maybe a different viewpoint. And then, of course, there's the construction and reconstruction. I found this article actually really helpful. What I like about Janet Sturm's work is she also looks at language and literacy from the aspect of augmentative and alternative communication users. What you'll notice on the next 3 slides is she's focusing on language domains such as phonology, but then there's the implications for reading. Phonological skills are related to the development of phonemic awareness and decoding. And then implications for writing. Phonological skills are related to spelling development. So I really like that she broke this down. This is actually the table that's in that article that I just shared. I won't go into too much detail, but again, it's a really nice resource for looking at what are we looking at when we think about syntax and the implications for reading and writing, or pragmatics, or the actual use of language. And then, you know, discourse, how are we, again, using language in different ways. Here's the infamous reading rope that was referred to. I again, really like this because it does look at language from different aspects, as well as that word recognition. You know, how are we tying in the background knowledge of our AAC users? Sometimes we need to consider how we're tapping into the information that they already know in order for them to start learning the words and start guessing and feeling comfortable with the information that's presented to them in print. How are we developing vocabulary and semantics, looking at language structure, verbal reasoning, the inferences, and the different elements of looking at literacy knowledge, as well as, of course, the phonological awareness, because once you sound it out, so I'm going to share a story about my son. He is not an AAC user, but I learned so much from being a parent, of working with students who have complex communication needs, and then having a child who was going through like the literacy learning process. He attended a school which was Spanish immersion, but in Montessori, they had taught him phonemic awareness really early on, and he had been exposed to Spanish, but he wasn't necessarily fluent. The very first activity that they gave him in kindergarten was to color based on the word that was inside this butterfly. And so he would sound out negro, and he goes, negro. He goes, okay, so that's black. And so he colored in black. And then he did azul. okay, azul, and he tied into his verbal memory of azul means blue. So he's listening to, using phonemic awareness, the words that are in his background knowledge, and then actually for him, translating it into another language that he's comfortable with. So this is something that really kind of helped me launch into even some of our AAC users. How are we getting them to use maybe their internal voice to do the same sort of things? So the components of literacy, we're here at the Literacy Symposium. I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, guided oral reading, teaching vocabulary, vocabulary words, reading comprehension strategies are all part of literacy instruction, whether we're teaching students who are verbal or those who use something else. This is just a nice graphic. I kind of thought it was cool, honestly. So it's colorful. It talks about the 5 big ideas. So I'll let you dive deeper into that later. So as we're thinking about our emergent and conventional literacy, some things to think about is that emergent literacy refers to all the actions, understandings, and misunderstandings of learners engaged in experiences that involved print creation or use, and that these experiences are not only necessary, but closely related to later literacy outcomes. We have to be playing with language in order for us to be doing this. Conventional literacy, if you can't access the article, you may need to either email me or find a speech pathologist near you, but feel free to email me. Going back to our slides, so conventional literacy refers to reading and writing that follows the form, content, and use of standard conventions. The Literacy Symposium is touching on various elements of that. Conventional literacy is built on discoveries and understandings made during the emergent literacy phase of development. So again, remember, we always talk about we're first learning to read and then we're reading to learn. So this is just kind of a side-by-side of conventional learning skills that are needed, such as decoding, oral reading fluency, reading comprehension, writing, and spelling, and then the essential skills prior to conventional literacy, which is being able to identify letters of the alphabet, interest and engaging in shared reading opportunities. And there's there's some sort of means of communication and interaction where they're able to engage in that expression. And then they understand that print has meaning. Here's a couple of key points. This actually, I really like this. Lori Geist had presented at Helix a couple years ago, and it kind of gives that side-by-side of, here's the checklist of what can your student do. And if they can't, then maybe there are daily emergent literacy interventions that you can be tapping into. The blue items that are listed below, Project Core and sharedreader.org, are both hyperlinks. So if you happen to see anything that's that royal blue color, it's a hyperlink to more information. And then also, if it's turquoise on one of the other slides, just because I wanted it to contrast with the background, turquoise also means that it's hyperlinked. So go exploring. I have lots of links for you to check out. Emergent literacy routines might include shared reading, predictable chart writing, alphabet knowledge and phonological awareness, independent reading, and independent writing. Sometimes our emergent communicators are stringing together letters in ways that you're going to have to really take a leap of faith and look for the patterns that might be burgeoning words. We want our students to be able to type things in and have that guided practice of how are we looking at these words, and then get the feedback of, ooh, I see you stringing together CRS. Are you spelling cars? Maybe their favorite movie is Cars. I just babysat helped babysit a couple of almost 5-year-olds. Their favorite movie that they watched every day was Cars. And they repeated every movie line, which is also another literacy skill. As we're looking at shared reading, here are some of the benefits of shared reading. It builds emergent literacy understandings. Again, we're looking at that language comprehension, because if we put it in and they start to develop that phonemic awareness, they're going to start recognizing and reading. So we need to constantly make a literacy investment in reading to them all the time, providing that meaning, providing that feedback, and allowing them to explore. We're building critical background knowledge by doing this. And then we're also allowing them to demonstrate how meaning is made from print. We might be pointing to their favorite word. They might even fill in the final word of a sentence that you read, and then they fill in that final word, whether it's verbally because they have, you know, 1 or 2 words that they can functionally use, or their communication device. I did this all the time with some of my AAC users, where sometimes I let them finish the sentence because it allowed them to also work on their operational skills and finding the vocabulary in their systems. And then it built the language that allowed them to be more proficient in other settings. So predictable chart writing is just a type of modeled writing initially developed as a technique for helping students that, irrespective of their language abilities, again, it just kind of gives that predictability that allows them to make an educated guess at what's going to come next, or allows them to practice in order to write similar sentences so that they're working on that syntax. When we're working on alphabetic knowledge and phonological awareness, it's tied so closely together. Whether as a speech pathologist with verbal students who are working on articulation, or with some of my augmentative communication users who were working either on articulation or augmentative communication, we were always working on, like, what's the first letter sound? Most of the robust electronic devices have some sort of at least an alphabet board, if not a phonological awareness, or like a phonemic board, where it's saying the sound without saying the letter. If you have one versus the other, you're going to have to play with it, but help them sound it out. Once it's in the message window, then they can sound out the word itself. And then of course we have independent writing, which allows students a way to communicate and tell people things. It's really exciting when students are able to quickly sequence through a series of single word messages or phrase starters, and then spell the thing that they want, because that vocabulary words like chlorophyll, just going to keep using that word, you know, wasn't in their system, but they were able to spell enough of it, even with the grammar prediction that's part of it. Sometimes it'll do inventive spelling, and it'll, based on frequency, make that word prediction. And if they can recognize it as a first level to reading and writing print, then awesome, let's keep building on that. And it's effective. The other aspect I really emphasize for those students who are able to start learning phonemic awareness and alphabets, being able to type using 26 letters versus 5,000 words in a robust system is way more efficient. So we want to have our communicators be able to spell and communicate anything they want. So independent reading, shared excitement and interest in reading is something that you apply by doing. You explore many different types of reading and materials, get them excited about anything. Honestly, if they're even in those teen magazines for some of our high school students, because it's got like pretty easy reading, but it's got topics that they might be interested in. You'd be surprised at what some of our students are into, depending on their age range. Then it also, you know, when they're doing independent reading, they can be applying skills that they learn during other literacy routines. There are also, there's different websites that I have hyperlinked later that you might also explore with some of your students that allow them to be independent, but it also highlights the word that allows them to hear the word itself and map the meaning to the print itself. I really do like that highlighting feature for some of our emergent readers. So this is the universal resources that I was talking about, where Tar Heel Reader is well known. It also is switch accessible for some of our students who use that method of access. Wordless picture books are my favorite for having them do essentially writing. If they're using a high-tech system, or even if they're using a system, an augmentative communication system that give them the words that you then are writing down as you're co-constructing something. These wordless books are great because it allows them the opportunity to either use the alphabet or words that are already in their existing system, or maybe even some of our students will have topic boards that they're like, I want to talk about this, and then you jump into their communication system. Nothing is more powerful than being able to use personally meaningful pictures, like of vacations, their favorite person, their dog, their cat, their turtle. But these are great things. And then the cool thing about, if you're using it on a high-tech device, you can co-construct meanings and have like invisible hotspots, basically invisible buttons that have the message. So it might be a picture of, you know, maybe they went down the shore, along the Jersey Shore, and it was a sunny day. And so if you hit, if you touch the invisible hotspot over the sun, it might say, it was a sunny day, it was hot. And then you touch the water was nice and cool. Again, you would co-construct this with your students as a way to develop those literacy skills and tap into background knowledge, but you're guiding them through this process. There are some other things like books and books, Epic, ReadWorks, News, ELA, Tar Heel Reader, we already talked about. So there's lots of great resources that are available. Considering strategies and methods for access. These are things that, you know, again, I'm thinking as how do I access it from the standpoint of my student who uses some form of augmentative and alternative communication. So I sat in on Dr. Glazer's session, and my favorite thing that she said was, we are wired for language, regardless of what it is. We have students that want to communicate with us. We have to teach them how to use the systems and how to become more literate so they have a lot more independence. And then Jan Wasowitz, I hope I said that correctly. She said reading and writing is language. So is AAC. AAC is language. It's just language with stuff. So when I look at this as a speech language pathologist or as an educator, I'm looking at really from the standpoint of language, what's the content, form, and use. And literacy is absolutely tied to these things. So I know, right? Finding meaning based on the context may require a leap of faith. This is what I was talking about earlier. If they throw out something that isn't related to your lesson, it could be that it reminded them of something that they just named. They could also be off task, but I'm not gonna like pretend like it's not. But if they have a conversation about that and be like, oh, you know, we were talking about cars and you mentioned your dog. Does your dog go for rides with you? And then you've got the yes, no sort of, you know, engagement. Or you might say, oh, you know, if they continue and they said yes, then you might ask other questions, depending on the size of your group. I mean, sometimes it's realistic, sometimes it's not. But it is kind of nice. You can divert and talk about other things if you're getting the vibe from your students that maybe they want to talk about dogs over the cars. You know, it doesn't hurt to divert from the activity to get them to be using the language that they have access to, and then bring it back to the activity. There's that. Here are some language activity examples that you might do. Full disclosure, I clicked on the hyperlink earlier, it's broken, but it actually came from a blog from the CHOP that's in Richmond. But I just thought it was a nice list of, you know, things that you'll be thinking about in language activities, and really building language are phonological processing, rhyming words. How are we rhyming what are the syllables that we talked about earlier in the symposium, vocabulary and tying the semantics, and then the verbal expression. Oh, good. Yeah, the link. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm glad the link works. Oh no, I'm wrong. I swapped out the link that was not working. That one does work. So this one's based on literacy. It's not the one fish, two fish. So there's that. And then again, we're looking at what are the language or the literacy skills that we can be using as AAC strategies? Because I'm always thinking again, how are my students going to access the literacy activity and language in a way that allows them to be much more independent? If we're looking at, phonemic awareness and letter sounds, then it starts with, that's an easy strategy. They can have a message that says it starts with, and then you can refer them back to their alphabet board. And if within a lesson is so super easy to guess the context, then if they're rhyming, I thought it was really cool. One time I was at a seminar where a student had a robust communication system. However, he met somebody who had a name that rhymed with a word in his system. So this person happened to ask a question in the middle of the session, and he said, "Hi, Heather," and answered the question. He didn't have Heather in his device. He rhymed it with weather. And in that moment, "Hi, Heather" and "Hi, weather" or "Hi, feather" sounded close enough that she thought her name was already in there. And she was like, "How'd you do that?" He didn't, he rhymed. And that's the beauty of literacy. It sounds like is also another, it might be closely related as we're doing the homonyms and homophones. Sight word recognition is fabulous because once we have that phonemic awareness, we're able to recognize and map those words as having meaning, and then we read faster, right? And then of course, vocabulary, we're always building that. And then the ability to answer WH questions is, how are you co-constructing? Is it a who, what, where, when, why question? But again, we're always looking at how are we describing and using the tools that are available that then lead to more efficient communication. I love that, Lynn, your AAC users do such a creative brainstorming to find words that they have in their heads. That is like the essence of literacy and language. So this is a free resource this summer. You can get a free trial from the Unique Learning Systems. Usually they have a summer curriculum. It's not as easy to download this year, I have to say. I had to go in, sign up for the free trial and get this. But what I really like about it is, in the absence of creativity sometimes, if you have access to ULS, either through your teachers or you have News to You or something, you can be using some of these tools within your activities where here's a brainstorming activity. This is a graphic organizer. What are some of the activities that Rick does at camp? This is related to the activity. So they can actually list the things from the item. You could also, if they don't have it in their system, you could be holding up some of the pictures from the curriculum itself and give them that choice-making opportunity. And then the other thing you could do is, if you're doing a group, if one student picks the right answer and the other student is working on yes, no, you might ask that person, did Rick bring his, I'm trying to think did Rick bring his toy car to camp? And then that person would have the opportunity to answer yes or no. And then if he says no, you might ask another student, what did he bring if he didn't bring a car to camp? And then it opens it up as like a regular lesson. But again, you're using those strategies in creative ways. I like this one. Here is more of like that predictable writing aspect within the activity itself, but you're also working on rhyming because life is but a, rhymes with stream, must be dream, and they've heard it before. So now they know what to look for. And then I liked this is we're going to camp. We need to pack our, they could name anything. They could spell anything. I really like that aspect. And then this is actually something that I've used when working with my students. I threw up there an example. The one that I shared with you is actually a document that I've used before. Yours is blank. It creates a forced copy so that you can have your own forced copy and you can do whatever you want with it. But what I like about this is it forces you to really think about and communicate with your other colleagues. What's the activity? What are we targeting? Like, what exactly are we targeting? I just threw in there, like, identify initial letter sounds. And then maybe identify semantically related vocabulary, because we're also working on categories. You might be using visual supports that are associated with the activity or that you've created. You might also have aided language modeling because you're pointing to the actual items in a way that allows, again, them to tie the meaning to what's there. Or if you have a picture book, or there's my favorite when I walk into a classroom is when an educator says, turn to page 53, and they turn to page 53. This is a visual support, because now they can see page 53 has these pictures and this layout of what it looks like. So then you might also include, like, what are they expected to do that's no tech, no stuff? Are they going to answer yes, no? Are they going to point to the item that's in front of them? Again, we're using those strategies in the access method that they're using both for their augmentative communication, for maybe their learning, but again, this is a learning activity with literacy. And then if they have a high-tech device, or they have some sort of system, whether it's a communication book or something, hopefully they have some sort of phonemic or alphabet board that allows them to, like, with help and assistance, be spelling words that allow them to become independent with their literacy. And then they might have, like in this instance, I was just using the going to camp example. They might have a camp page because they are going to camp. Some of the AAC users actually go to dedicated AAC camps. So it's really actually quite cool. They ride horses, go swimming, do normal kid stuff, and use AAC. So I'm going to go really quickly through a few more resources that you have. These are some that I know that I've used. I've used also a ton of others. Feel free to email me at the address that Kristen had put in there. But Unique Learning System, like I said, it's already made. If you have access to it because your district has access to it, try to tap into that because everything's already there. You just think about different ways to access using strategies or the way that they're engaging with or accessing their tools or their communication. Tar Heel Reader is already set to go. You can either be reading or writing. I actually might click on this. You can find a book or you can write a book. I really love that because you can be describing pictures, like I said. We have some emergent writers. We also have people, you can, as an educator, also write your own books, but there are some users who have constructed them. Some of them are familiar books just with real pictures, like Brown Bear has become like a like another version, but using that cadence and rhythm, just a different topic. It's kind of nice. Tumble Books, just quickly going back to that, I love it because it has sounds. 50 Below Zero is one of them. And what you have to do, not all the links, usually you can get this as a free resource from your libraries. I don't want to say this out loud, but if you do a Google search for free, you might be able to find a link to having access to Tumble Books. And what I have done is I'll have it so that the student, if the student is using a switch scanning device, I will hover the mouse over the little arrow to read the next page so that once it's done, then they click on their switch and then it reads, it turns the page and reads it for them. That's an independent reading opportunity. And you can set it to highlight their words. So love that. Epic kind of does the same thing, but it's on the iPad. Just something to like think about. So I do have like a bunch of resources after this, but high expectations are the outward manifestation of belief and hope in someone. What my main message behind this is, what do high expectations look like for our AAC users? How are we teaching literacy from the beginning? How are we infusing it in everything we do with them? Because literacy and language, again, are so closely tied that especially for AAC users, they're using symbolic representation to express themselves. But how do we get them to look at print in a way that's meaningful and helps them become independent, literate communicators? So I do have, I'm hoping this still works. This was a 6-month free trial to Book Creator. And then really quickly, we have a ton of resources that I made available to you, where if you just click on the hyperlink, there's literacy resources for students with significant cognitive abilities. Those are all there. I'm actually have like 4 minutes to spare. I think I probably talked too fast. I must apologize. For those of you who want to try a device, maybe you have a student who doesn't yet have a robust system. I put the names of Rick Creech and Greg Gerhardt. Those are our 2 AT assistive technology educational consultants on our initiative team that you could contact for more information. Try Rick first. That's his job. But Greg also is in charge of the AIMS Center, and he provides the tools and resources for students who have visual impairments. So definitely reach out to him. The rest of the slides that you have access to are also things that, there's like app lists, something if you are really struggling with access, or you have hopefully an occupational therapist on your team, you might watch with them at least the overview of Access Basics. I really love it because it allows you to think differently about how are we helping our students sit in the appropriate way in order for them to best engage in activities. We also have other things like overview of feature matching. Feature matching is what we use to look at technology and the features that it offers, regardless of whether the student has low incidence disabilities or high incidence disabilities. How are we matching the accessibility features that the students need in order to be successful for learning and communication? And life has no limitations except the ones you make. So let's have high expectations. Let's teach our students how to be literate and amazing communicators. So with that, hopefully I've given you either the gift of time or an opportunity to ask your question.
This was amazing. So many resources. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.